Marcus Chen had always been what his neighbors politely called eccentric. The 32-year-old software engineer lived alone in a modest two-story house on Maple Street, where the paint peeled slightly around the window frames and the garden grew wild with untended roses. What made Marcus truly different, however, was his inability to turn away any creature in need. It started with Whiskers, a one-eyed tabby he found shivering behind the dumpster at his office building 3 years ago. Then came Luna, a pregnant calico who gave birth to 4 kittens under his front porch. Before long, Marcus's house had become an unofficial sanctuary for every stray, abandoned, and injured cat in the neighborhood. The veterinary bills alone would have bankrupted most people, but Marcus lived frugally, driving a 15-year-old Honda and eating instant noodles so he could afford proper care for his feline family. His co-workers thought he was crazy. His mother worried he'd become a hermit. But Marcus had found his purpose in those grateful purrs and trusting amber eyes. On a particularly cold Tuesday evening in November, Marcus was returning from the grocery store when he spotted something unusual in the alley behind Chen's Chinese restaurant. At first glance, it looked like just another cat, black as midnight with strange golden markings along its sides. But as Marcus approached with a can of tuna, he noticed the creature was larger than any house cat he'd ever seen, roughly the size of a small dog. The animal was clearly injured. Its left hind leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and there were what appeared to be burn marks across its sleek coat. Most disturbing of all were its eyes, not the typical green or yellow of a cat, but a deep crimson that seemed to glow in the dim street light. "Hey there, buddy," Marcus said softly, crouching down and opening the tuna can. "You look like you've had a rough day." The creature regarded him with those unsettling red eyes, and for a moment Marcus could have sworn he saw something almost human in its expression. Intelligence, recognition, and perhaps most surprising of all, surprise. Most strays either fled immediately or approached with desperate hunger. This one seemed to be evaluating him, weighing options with the careful consideration of a chess master. Finally, it limped forward, favoring its injured leg, and began to eat with delicate, precise bites. Marcus waited patiently, noting details that seemed odd for a typical stray. The creature's fur, despite being matted with dirt and blood, had an almost metallic sheen. Its movements, even injured, carried a grace that spoke of power held in check. And those markings along its sides, the more Marcus looked at them, the more they resembled ancient symbols rather than natural coloring. "You're not exactly a normal cat, are you?" Marcus murmured. The creature paused in its eating and looked up at him. For just an instant, Marcus could have sworn he saw the faintest nod. 20 minutes later, Marcus was carrying the injured animal into his house, much to the consternation of his other cats. Whiskers hissed from his perch on the kitchen counter. Luna arched her back and retreated to the safety of the couch. Even the usually friendly Mochi, a orange tabby rescue, seemed disturbed by the newcomer's presence. Marcus set up a comfortable bed in the spare room, along with food, water, and a litter box. The creature, which he'd decided to call Shadow for obvious reasons, settled onto the blanket with a dignified air that reminded Marcus more of a king taking his throne than a wounded animal seeking shelter. "I'll take you to Dr. Martinez tomorrow," Marcus said, gently examining the injured leg. "She's good with difficult cases." Shadow's red eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made Marcus's skin prickle. There was something ancient in that gaze, something that spoke of power and knowledge far beyond what any animal should possess. But Marcus had always been good at ignoring things that didn't make sense. His focus was simple. This creature was hurt and needed help. That night, Marcus was awakened by the sound of his other cats yowling in distress. He stumbled out of bed and found them all huddled in the living room, staring toward the spare room with expressions of terror. The air itself seemed different, charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. Marcus approached the spare room cautiously and peered inside. Shadow was lying exactly where he'd left him, but the air around the creature seemed to shimmer with an almost invisible heat. The water in the bowl was steaming, despite the cool November night, and those golden markings on Shadow's sides were definitely glowing now, pulsing with a soft, rhythmic light. "Okay," Marcus said quietly to himself. "That's new." Any rational person would have called animal control, or the police, or possibly a priest. But Marcus had never been particularly rational when it came to helping those in need. If Shadow was something unusual, something beyond normal understanding, then he probably needed help even more than a regular stray. Marcus spent the rest of the night researching online, diving deep into forums about exotic pets, genetic mutations, and even more esoteric topics. He found references to unusual cat breeds, animals exposed to radiation, and stranger possibilities that he dismissed as internet folklore. Nothing quite matched what he was seeing in his spare room. The next morning brought fresh challenges. Dr. Martinez, a veterinarian who had seen Marcus through dozens of cat rescues, took one look at Shadow and went very still. "Marcus," she said carefully, "where did you find this animal?" "Behind Chen's restaurant." "Why?" "Is something wrong?" Dr. Martinez was an experienced professional who had dealt with everything from escaped exotic pets to animals with rare genetic conditions. But as she examined Shadow, her hands trembled slightly. "His bone structure is unusual," she said finally, "and his body temperature is running about 15 degrees higher than normal. These markings appear to be part of his natural coloring, but I've never seen anything like them. And his eyes—" "The red color? Is that dangerous?" "It's not the color that concerns me," Dr. Martinez said, stepping back from the examination table. "It's the way he's looking at me. Marcus, I've been a vet for 20 years, and I've never seen an animal with that kind of awareness." Despite her concerns, Dr. Martinez treated Shadow's injuries professionally. The leg was badly fractured but would heal with proper care. The burns were superficial but would need daily cleaning. She prescribed antibiotics and pain medication, though she admitted she wasn't entirely sure of the proper dosage for whatever Shadow actually was. "Keep him isolated from your other cats for now," she advised. "And Marcus, if anything unusual happens, anything at all, call me immediately." That evening, as Marcus sat in the spare room reading while Shadow rested, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being studied. Every time he looked up, those red eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that was both unsettling and oddly comforting. "You understand me, don't you?" Marcus said finally. "I don't know what you are, but you're definitely not just a cat." Shadow raised his head and regarded Marcus for a long moment. Then, very deliberately, he placed one paw on Marcus's hand. The touch was electric, not painful, but charged with an energy that made Marcus's hair stand on end. For just an instant, he could have sworn he felt something else, something vast and ancient and powerful, touching the edges of his consciousness. Images flashed through his mind, great winged shapes moving through star-filled skies, cities of crystal and fire, beings of incredible power locked in cosmic battles that spanned galaxies. And through it all, a sense of loss so profound it made Marcus's heart ache with sympathetic pain. Then the contact was broken, and Marcus was left staring into those crimson eyes with a new understanding. Whatever Shadow was, wherever he came from, he was far from home and in more trouble than a simple broken leg could explain. "You're hiding, aren't you?" Marcus whispered. "Someone hurt you, and now you're hiding." Shadow's response was to curl up closer to Marcus, resting his large head against the human's leg. Despite everything strange about the situation, Marcus felt a deep sense of rightness. He had always been driven to help those who couldn't help themselves. If Shadow was some kind of refugee from whatever cosmic conflict Marcus had glimpsed, then he needed protection even more than the ordinary strays Marcus had rescued over the years. As the days passed, Shadow's injuries began to heal with remarkable speed. Within a week, he was walking normally again. The burns faded to faint silver lines that only enhanced the mysterious markings along his sides. But more significant than his physical recovery was the gradual change in the household dynamic. At first, Marcus's other cats had given Shadow a wide berth, sensing something dangerous about the newcomer. But Shadow seemed determined to integrate himself into the feline hierarchy with surprising gentleness. He never competed for food, always allowing the smaller cats to eat first. When Luna's kitten patches got stuck behind the washing machine, Shadow somehow managed to retrieve him without apparent effort, despite being far too large to fit in the narrow space. Most remarkably, Shadow seemed to serve as a calming influence on the more aggressive cats. Whiskers, who had always been territorial and prone to starting fights, became noticeably more peaceful in Shadow's presence. It was as if the mysterious newcomer radiated an authority that even other animals recognized and respected. Marcus began to suspect that Shadow's influence extended beyond simple animal behavior. His own life seemed to be improving in small but noticeable ways. His chronic insomnia, which had plagued him for years, virtually disappeared. His work performance improved dramatically, leading to a promotion and raise that finally put his veterinary bills within reasonable limits. Even his social life, long neglected in favor of caring for his cats, began to flourish as neighbors and co-workers found themselves drawn to his newfound confidence and energy. It was Mrs. Peterson from next door who first voiced what Marcus had been trying not to think about. "That new cat of yours is special, isn't it?" she said one afternoon as she watched Shadow lounging in Marcus's garden. The other cats were arranged around him like courtiers attending their king, and even Mrs. Peterson's usually aggressive German shepherd was sitting peacefully at the fence line, watching Shadow with obvious respect. "What makes you say that?" Marcus asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. "I've been having the most wonderful dreams since he arrived," Mrs. Peterson said dreamily. "Flying dreams, like I'm soaring over beautiful landscapes I've never seen before, and my arthritis hasn't bothered me once this week." She paused, studying Shadow more closely. "He's not really a cat, is he?" Before Marcus could formulate an answer, Shadow rose gracefully from his resting spot and walked over to where they stood. He looked up at Mrs. Peterson with those luminous red eyes, and she gasped softly. "Oh my," she whispered. "You're something magnificent. Aren't you?" Shadow's response was to rub against her legs with a purr that seemed to resonate at a frequency that made the air itself vibrate. Mrs. Peterson's face transformed with wonder and joy, years seeming to fall away as she knelt to stroke Shadow's sleek fur. That night, Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with possibilities he barely dared to consider. Shadow was curled up next to him, a privilege the mysterious creature had claimed without asking and which Marcus found himself unable to refuse. The other cats were arranged around the room like guards, and Marcus had the strangest feeling that they were protecting something far more important than just another rescued stray. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new mysteries to unravel. But tonight, with Shadow's warm weight against his side and the soft sound of contented purring filling the room, Marcus felt more at peace than he had in years. Whatever Shadow truly was, wherever he had come from, Marcus was determined to keep him safe. He had no way of knowing that his simple act of compassion had just set in motion events that would reshape the destiny of two worlds, or that the creature sleeping trustingly beside him was indeed royalty, the exiled dragon monarch of the Andromeda sector, whose enemies were already searching the galaxy for any trace of their missing prey. 3 weeks after Shadow's arrival, Marcus's quiet suburban life began to show signs of strain in ways he couldn't quite explain. Electronic devices malfunctioned around the house with increasing frequency. His microwave had started displaying symbols instead of numbers. The television occasionally picked up signals that seemed to show star maps rather than regular programming. Most disturbing of all, Marcus had begun having vivid dreams of flying through space, soaring past nebulae and alien worlds with a freedom that felt achingly familiar. The changes weren't limited to his home. Throughout the neighborhood, people reported unusually pleasant dreams and improved health. Mrs. Peterson's arthritis had indeed disappeared completely. Mr. Rodriguez's chronic back pain was gone. Even cranky old Mr. Thompson seemed to have developed a sunny disposition overnight. The local wildlife had begun behaving strangely as well. Birds would perch in organized formations around Marcus's house. Squirrels would bring offerings of nuts and shiny objects to the garden, and dogs from blocks away would sit vigil at his fence line. Marcus tried to maintain his routine, going to work each day and pretending everything was normal, but it became increasingly difficult to ignore the way Shadow watched him with those knowing red eyes, as if waiting for something Marcus couldn't understand. The other cats had begun treating Shadow with obvious deference, bringing him their toys and the choicest portions of their food. Luna had even started grooming Shadow's coat, though she had never shown such behavior with any other cat. Dr. Martinez called on a Thursday afternoon with results from the blood samples she had taken during Shadow's initial examination. "Marcus," she said, her voice tight with confusion, "I've run these tests 3 times, and I keep getting impossible results. This animal's cellular structure is unlike anything in the veterinary literature. His DNA contains sequences that don't match any known species on Earth, and his blood—" She paused, clearly struggling with how to explain. "His blood contains trace amounts of elements that shouldn't exist in a stable form." "What does that mean?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer. "It means that whatever Shadow is, he didn't evolve on this planet. Marcus, I think you're harboring an extraterrestrial life form." That evening, as Marcus sat in his living room, surrounded by his feline family, he finally decided to confront the truth he had been avoiding. Shadow was lying on the couch beside him, his presence radiating that strange warmth that had become so familiar. "All right," Marcus said aloud, feeling slightly foolish. "I know you can understand me. I've known it from the beginning. The question is, what are you really, and what do you need from me?" Shadow raised his head and looked directly into Marcus's eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air in the room began to shimmer, and Marcus felt that electric touch against his consciousness again, stronger this time. The images came in a flood. Vast ships moving between stars, beings of incredible beauty and power who could take any form they chose, a civilization spanning multiple galaxies built on principles of harmony and protection, and at the center of it all, a figure Marcus recognized with shock. Shadow, but not as a cat. Instead, he appeared as a magnificent dragon-like being, scales shifting between black and gold, wings that could span city blocks, eyes that held the wisdom of millennia. The story unfolded in Marcus's mind like a cosmic epic. Shadow was indeed royalty, Draconis Rex, the dragon monarch of the Andromeda sector, guardian of 12 inhabited star systems and protector of countless species. His empire had been one of peace and prosperity, where the strong protected the weak and knowledge was shared freely among all sentient beings. But power always attracted those who would corrupt it. A faction led by Shadow's own brother, Malphus the Destroyer, had orchestrated a brutal coup. They believed that the Dragon Empire should rule through fear and conquest rather than cooperation. The civil war that followed had torn apart star systems and left billions dead. In the final battle above the crystal world of Zeraphine, Shadow had been betrayed by his most trusted general. Wounded and outnumbered, he had used the last of his strength to activate an ancient emergency protocol, a dimensional gateway that would transport him to a random inhabited world where he could hide until his power returned. The gateway had brought him to Earth, specifically to that alley behind Chen's restaurant, in a form that would allow him to blend in while he healed. But the transformation had cost him dearly. His power was severely diminished, and he was trapped in this smaller form until he could find a way to restore his true strength. The mental connection faded, leaving Marcus gasping and overwhelmed. Shadow watched him carefully, crimson eyes filled with ancient sadness and desperate hope. "You're not just hiding," Marcus said finally. "You're in exile. And your brother, he's still looking for you, isn't he?" Shadow's response was a low rumble that vibrated through Marcus's bones. Even in his diminished state, the Dragon Monarch's distress was palpable. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and looking out at his quiet suburban street. Everything he thought he knew about reality had just been shattered. He was harboring not just an alien, but galactic royalty fleeing from a civil war that spanned star systems. The logical part of his mind screamed that this was impossible, that he should call someone, anyone, who might know how to handle such a situation. But the larger part of him, the part that had always driven him to help those in need, felt only a deep sense of purpose. Shadow needed protection, and Marcus was perhaps the only being on Earth who could provide it. "How long do you need?" Marcus asked, turning back to face Shadow. "How long before you can return to your true form and fight back?" The answer came not in images, but in a feeling. Months, possibly years. Shadow's power was regenerating slowly, but the process required safety, stability, and most importantly, the freely given friendship of someone who knew his true nature and chose to help anyway. The next few days passed in a strange new normalcy. Marcus went to work, came home, and cared for his cats, all while knowing that one of them was actually an interdimensional being of immense power. Shadow seemed content to maintain his feline disguise, though Marcus noticed he had begun displaying new behaviors. He would sit for hours staring at the night sky, and occasionally Marcus would catch him manipulating small objects without touching them, a pen floating across the desk, a toy mouse moving in perfect patterns across the floor. The peace was shattered on a cold Saturday morning when Marcus woke to find every cat in the house crowded into his bedroom, all of them staring out the window with obvious terror. Shadow was standing on the windowsill, his fur standing on end and a low, dangerous growl emanating from his throat. Marcus looked outside and saw them, 3 figures standing on the street corner, perfectly still and obviously out of place. They appeared human, but something about their posture and the way they moved suggested otherwise. They were dressed in expensive suits that seemed somehow wrong, as if the fabric existed in too many dimensions at once. And they were all staring directly at Marcus's house. "Friends of yours?" Marcus asked Shadow quietly. The growl deepened, and for just an instant, Marcus could have sworn he saw Shadow's true form flickering around the edges, massive wings, scales that gleamed like armor, eyes like burning stars. The temperature in the room spiked, and the windows began to fog with condensation. One of the figures on the street raised its hand, and Marcus felt a pressure against his consciousness, as if something was trying to push its way into his mind. The sensation was invasive and deeply unpleasant. Nothing like Shadow's gentle mental touch. But before the intrusion could take hold, Shadow leaped from the windowsill and placed himself directly between Marcus and the window. The mental assault hit Shadow instead, and the response was immediate and devastating. A wave of power exploded outward from the house, invisible but unmistakable. Streetlights flickered. Car alarms went off throughout the neighborhood, and every electronic device within a 3-block radius temporarily shut down. The 3 figures on the street staggered backward, their carefully maintained human appearances flickering to reveal something reptilian and hostile underneath. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the figures vanished, not by walking away or getting into a vehicle, but simply ceasing to exist, leaving only the faint smell of ozone and burning metal. Shadow collapsed onto the carpet, his small body trembling with exhaustion. Marcus immediately knelt beside him, checking for injuries and finding none. Though Shadow's fur was noticeably dimmer, and the golden markings had faded almost to invisibility. "They found you," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. "Your brother's agents. They know you're here." Shadow managed a weak nod before curling into a tight ball. The effort of repelling the mind attack had cost him dearly, probably setting back his recovery by weeks or months. Over the next few days, Marcus threw himself into research with the desperation of someone whose life depended on finding answers. He scoured every resource he could think of: scientific journals, mythology texts, even internet forums dedicated to extraterrestrial contact. What he found was fragmentary but disturbing. Throughout history, there had been scattered reports of beings matching the description of Shadow's enemies. They were shapeshifters, capable of taking human form but fundamentally alien and hostile. They seemed to be searching for something or someone, and they had appeared at various points throughout Earth's history, always leaving destruction in their wake. Marcus also discovered references to their opposites: benevolent beings described in various mythologies as dragons, angels, or spirit guardians. These creatures were said to be protectors of humanity, working behind the scenes to guide and defend the species. Could Shadow's people have been visiting Earth for centuries, keeping watch over humanity's development? The implications were staggering. If Shadow was truly one of these legendary guardians, then his presence on Earth wasn't just a random accident of interdimensional travel. He might have been drawn here because Earth was under his protection, part of some ancient covenant between his people and humanity. But if that was true, then his enemy's presence here was even more ominous. They weren't just hunting a political rival, they were threatening a world under the protection of the Dragon Monarch. Marcus made his decision on Tuesday evening as he watched Shadow slowly recover his strength. The mysterious cat was sitting by the window again, staring at the stars with obvious longing. The other cats had arranged themselves around him in protective formation, as if they too understood the magnitude of what was at stake. "I know what I have to do," Marcus said aloud. "You need time to heal, and they're going to keep coming, so we need to make sure they can't find you." Shadow looked at him questioningly. Marcus had been thinking about it for days, researching everything from off-grid living to advanced security systems. But the solution that kept coming back to him was both simpler and more complex than anything technology could provide. "We're going to disappear," Marcus said. "Not just hide, actually disappear from their detection methods. I've been reading about electromagnetic interference, psychic shielding, even old folklore about protection spells. If they're using some kind of dimensional scanning to track you, then we need to find a place where those scans can't penetrate." Over the following weeks, Marcus made careful preparations. He sold his house through a series of shell companies, ensuring no direct trail could lead back to him. He researched remote locations where electromagnetic interference was naturally high, places near underground mineral deposits or areas with unusual geological properties. Finally, he found it: a small cabin in the Montana wilderness, built over a natural cave system rich in rare earth elements. The geological surveys indicated that the area had unusual magnetic properties that interfered with most electronic devices. If Shadow's enemies were using technology to track him, this might be the perfect hiding place. The journey itself was carefully planned to avoid detection. Marcus rented a series of different vehicles, never keeping one for more than a day. He and his cats traveled in stages, staying in pet-friendly motels and always paying cash. Shadow remained alert throughout the journey, his red eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for threats. It wasn't until they reached the Montana cabin that Marcus finally allowed himself to believe they had succeeded. The location was perfect, completely isolated, naturally shielded, and surrounded by wilderness where any approaching threats would be visible long before they could attack. As Marcus unloaded the last of their supplies and watched his cats explore their new territory, Shadow approached him with something Marcus had never seen before in those ancient eyes: gratitude mixed with profound respect. That night, as Marcus sat on the cabin's porch watching the stars with Shadow beside him, he realized that his quiet life of rescuing strays had evolved into something far greater. He was now the protector of a being whose survival might determine the fate of multiple worlds. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it filled him with a sense of purpose unlike anything he had ever experienced. For the first time in his life, Marcus Chen knew exactly who he was meant to be. 6 months in the Montana wilderness had transformed both Marcus and Shadow in ways neither had anticipated. The isolation that should have felt like exile instead became a sanctuary where impossible things could unfold naturally. Marcus had grown lean and capable, his software engineer's pallor replaced by the weathered tan of someone who spent his days hiking mountain trails and chopping firewood. His cats had adapted to their new environment with surprising ease, becoming expert hunters and explorers while maintaining their domestic loyalty. But the most dramatic change was in Shadow himself. Day by day, his true nature had begun to reassert itself. He was larger now, nearly the size of a small dog, and his movements carried an unmistakable authority. The golden markings along his sides had grown brighter and more complex, forming intricate patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Most remarkably, his eyes had begun to show flecks of gold within the crimson depths, and sometimes, when the light caught them just right, they seemed to hold depths that stretched beyond the physical world. Marcus had started keeping a journal of the strange phenomena that surrounded Shadow's recovery. Electronics still malfunctioned in his presence, but now they did so in purposeful ways. The satellite internet would spontaneously connect to signals that shouldn't exist, displaying star charts and navigation data that Marcus couldn't begin to understand. The weather around their cabin seemed subtly controlled, with storms always parting to leave their valley in peaceful calm. And the wildlife had begun to behave in ways that suggested they recognized Shadow as something far more significant than another predator. Mountain lions would approach the cabin and sit vigil for hours, their usual aggression replaced by respectful attention. Bears would bring offerings of fish and honey, leaving them carefully arranged near the front door before disappearing back into the forest. Even the birds had organized themselves into complex patterns, their flights forming symbols that Marcus was beginning to recognize as some form of written language. It was during a particularly clear night in late spring that everything changed. Marcus was sitting on his porch, reading by the light of a solar lantern, when Shadow suddenly stood alert. Every cat in the vicinity froze, their attention focused on something in the distance that Marcus couldn't perceive. Then the stars began to move. At first, Marcus thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. But as he watched, specific constellations shifted position, rearranging themselves into new patterns. The movement was subtle but unmistakable, and it carried a sense of vast intelligence communicating across impossible distances. Shadow stepped forward and, for the first time since arriving on Earth, began to change. The transformation was gradual and magnificent. His form grew larger, his feline features elongating and shifting into something more reptilian but impossibly graceful. Wings began to emerge from his shoulders, translucent at first but growing more solid with each passing moment. His scales, now fully visible, shifted through a spectrum of colors that had no names in human language. Within minutes, the creature standing before Marcus was no longer a cat, but something from myth and legend. Shadow had become Draconis Rex, the dragon monarch, though still far smaller than his true cosmic form. He stood perhaps 8 feet tall, with wings that spanned 20 feet and eyes that held the swirling colors of nebulae. When he spoke, his voice resonated through Marcus's bones as much as his ears. "The time of hiding is over, my friend. My people have found me." Marcus looked up at the moving stars and understood. Those weren't constellations shifting position. They were ships, vast beyond comprehension, taking their places in patterns that spoke of military formations and cosmic authority. "Your people," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was witnessing. "Not your enemies." "My people," Draconis confirmed, though there was sadness in his cosmic voice. "My sister, Seraphina the Wise, leads them. She has been searching for me since the coup began. But Marcus—" The great dragon turned those swirling eyes toward him. "They do not understand what you have done. They see only a primitive world that has somehow managed to shelter their lost monarch. They come with gratitude, but also with assumptions about humanity's place in the cosmic order." The implications hit Marcus immediately. To beings capable of traveling between stars and reshaping reality with their thoughts, humanity would seem little more than clever animals. The idea that a human could freely choose to protect a dragon monarch without hope of reward or even understanding of what he was protecting would be incomprehensible to them. "They want to reward me," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him, "but they're thinking about it wrong. Yes, they will offer you power, longevity, transformation into something greater than human. They mean it as the highest honor, but that's not why I helped you." Marcus stood up, facing the magnificence of the restored dragon monarch without fear. "I didn't help you because I knew what you were. I helped you because you needed help. Changing me into something else would miss the point entirely." Draconis's expression, somehow readable despite his inhuman features, showed profound understanding and respect. "This is why humanity is worthy of protection, Marcus Chen. Your species possesses something that even we, in all our power and wisdom, sometimes forget. You have the capacity for selfless compassion, the ability to help others without thought of reward or recognition." The conversation was interrupted by a sound like cosmic thunder. Above them, the starships were beginning their descent, their massive forms briefly visible as they passed through Earth's atmosphere before engaging some form of cloaking technology. The first ship settled onto the meadow beyond Marcus's cabin with impossible grace, its landing disturbing neither a blade of grass nor a single wildflower. The airlock opened with a soft chime, and beings of impossible beauty began to emerge. They were clearly of the same species as Draconis, though they maintained more humanoid forms. Their leader was a female figure, whose presence radiated authority and wisdom that made Marcus feel simultaneously humbled and oddly protective. "Brother," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself sing. "We feared you were lost forever." "Sister," Draconis replied, inclining his great head, "I was lost, in more ways than one, but I have been found, and in the process, I have learned something that will reshape our understanding of this world and its people." Seraphina's attention shifted to Marcus, and he felt the weight of a cosmic intelligence examining him with curiosity and barely concealed condescension. "This is the primitive who sheltered you? How quaint. We must reward him appropriately. Perhaps transformation into a guardian form? Or translation to one of our pleasure worlds where he can live in comfort for the remainder of his brief lifespan?" Marcus felt a flash of irritation at being discussed as if he weren't present, but before he could respond, Draconis intervened. "Sister, you misunderstand completely. This being is not primitive, and he requires no reward. He helped me because it was the right thing to do, asking nothing in return. He represents the highest ideals of his species, ideals that we would do well to remember ourselves. The other dragons, For Marcus could see now that's what they were, despite their humanoid forms, murmured among themselves in languages that sounded like music and starlight. Serafina stepped closer to Marcus, her expression shifting from condescension to curiosity. "You ask for nothing?" she said directly to him. "No power, no wealth, no transformation beyond your current limitations?" "I ask for one thing," Marcus said, meeting her cosmic gaze steadily. "I ask that you understand what your brother has learned. Humanity isn't primitive just because we're less powerful than you. We have something valuable to offer the galaxy, not despite our limitations, but because of them." He gestured toward his cats, who had emerged from the cabin to watch the proceedings with typical feline dignity. "I rescued them not because I expected anything in return, but because they needed help, and I could provide it. Your brother needed the same thing, and I gave it for the same reason. That's not primitive behavior. That's the foundation of any civilization worth having." The meadow fell silent, except for the gentle sounds of wind in the trees and the distant call of an eagle. Serafina stared at Marcus for a long moment, her expression cycling through surprise, consideration, and finally, something that looked remarkably like respect. "You speak wisdom, Marcus Chen of Earth. My brother chose his sanctuary well." She turned to Draconis. "The coup has been crushed. Malphus and his followers have been defeated, though at great cost. The throne awaits your return, if you choose to claim it." Draconis was quiet for a long moment, his great head turning to look back at the cabin where he had spent months recovering not just his power, but his understanding of what that power should serve. "I will return," he said finally, "but not unchanged. I have learned something here that our people need to understand. Power without compassion is destruction. Wisdom without humility is blindness. This human and his world have taught me that the greatest strength lies not in the ability to dominate, but in the choice to protect those who cannot protect themselves." He turned to Marcus, and in those swirling cosmic eyes, Marcus saw both ancient gratitude and profound friendship. "You gave me refuge when I needed it most, asking nothing and expecting nothing. Now I offer you something in return. Not power or transformation, but partnership. Your world stands at the threshold of joining the galactic community. When that time comes, would you consider serving as humanity's first ambassador to the Dragon Empire?" Marcus looked around at the scene before him. Cosmic beings treating him as an equal, his cats observing the proceedings with typical feline composure, the familiar mountains of Montana serving as backdrop to an interaction that would reshape the future of two species. "I'll consider it," he said finally, "but I have a few conditions." Serafina laughed, a sound like silver bells mixed with cosmic radiation. "You continue to surprise us, human. State your conditions." "First, any partnership between our species has to be truly equal. No condescension, no assumptions about primitive versus advanced. Second, the focus has to be on mutual protection and assistance, not conquest or dominance. And third," Marcus grinned, reaching down to scratch whiskers behind the ears, "I'm keeping my cats." Draconis' response was something that might have been laughter if dragons laughed. "Your conditions are acceptable, Ambassador Chen, though I believe we will learn far more from you than you will from us." As the cosmic fleet prepared to depart, Draconis took one last look at the cabin that had been his sanctuary. "I will return when Earth is ready to join the galactic community," he promised Marcus. "Until then, know that this world is under the protection of the Dragon Empire. No force in this galaxy would dare threaten a planet that has shown such kindness to one of our own." The ships vanished as silently as they had arrived, leaving Marcus alone with his cats under the familiar Montana stars. But everything had changed. He was no longer just a software engineer who rescued strays. He was humanity's unofficial liaison to a cosmic civilization, a bridge between species, and the guardian of knowledge that would eventually reshape his entire world. As he sat on his porch that night, Luna curled up in his lap, and Whiskers maintaining his usual dignified distance, Marcus reflected on the strange path that had brought him here. He had started with a simple desire to help creatures in need. That same impulse had led him to shelter a being whose true nature he couldn't have imagined, and in doing so, he had helped forge a bond between species that would endure for generations. In the distance, an owl called to its mate, and Marcus smiled. Some things, he realized, were universal. The need for safety, for companionship, for someone who would offer help without expecting anything in return. These were not human weaknesses or primitive impulses. They were the foundation upon which any truly advanced civilization must be built. His cats seemed to agree, purring their contentment into the Montana night, while stars that Marcus now knew were home to friends kept their eternal watch overhead.